Good morning, esteemed colleagues. It gives me great pleasure this morning to introduce Dr. Nizar Zayed, who will be moderating the sessions led by ISDB, the Islamic Development Bank. This morning we'll be discussing finance in the water sector. So I look forward to these fruitful discussions. We all care about money, and how we're going to finance our projects. So we look forward to hear what they're talking about this morning. Thank you.
Thank you and good morning, Marlon. My name is Nizar Zaid, as you mentioned. But before I take the floor, I would like to give with your permission, to give the floor to Mr. Sami Farouqi, who will be giving some introductory remarks about our session this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Nizar, and thank you to Marlon and all the colleagues who have joined for this very important session today. And I am Sami Farouqi, and I'm heading the Social Infrastructure Global Practice in the bank. And as I would like to start this session with this thing that this is a very important event that the ISDB from the ISDB water sector team has participated in the previous year event as well, which brought in a lot of win-win situation for the young professionals who joined us in Cairo last year, as well as the team. We have also learned a lot from the interactions, the discussions that took place during the whole session. And this is exactly what I would like to say today, that of course the bank team will be sharing with you the key aspects or the key driving policies and the procedures and the strategic direction of the bank for financing the water sector programs and projects in our member countries. As you know, we have 57 member countries across 4 continents, so diverse needs in terms of regions, in terms of the countries, and within countries there are regional disparities that we need to really cover. So this brings us a lot of opportunities in sort of making sure that the design of the programs and the projects are in such a way that the financing that we provide to our member countries gives the best output. Of course, this will be followed by another important presentation by Dr. Hala, who will be presenting the irrigation infrastructure asset management aspects, which are also very important area, which really ensures that the design of the programs and the projects are more efficient and sustainable, and making sure that during the operation and completion they also provide the results that we really want to achieve. And we will also be sharing by our colleague Brother Fadir about the different examples of success stories in terms of the irrigation and drainage programs and projects that have been designed and implemented by the ISDB team to support our member countries. This is really an exciting collaboration between the ISDB, the ICID, the Global Water Partnership, as well as the ESCOA. So on behalf of the bank, I really would like to thank all our partners for joining us today, and also encourage all the young professionals who will be joining this session, and who will be contributing in terms of both the learning and sharing aspects. So this is not something which only will be delivered by the experts from the bank, but it needs to have this lively conversation in terms of exchange of information and knowledge, so that all sides will benefit from this session. With that, I would again thank everybody and declare this session open. I will be with you for some time, then I have another engagement, so I will leave the session to Brother Nizar to moderate during the rest of the session. Thank you, Brother Nizar, and all the team members. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. And thank you again, dear colleagues from GWP, from UNESCO, from ICAD, and of course the young water professionals who are with us for this session on water financing. As my colleague Brother Sami Farouki will be making three presentations actually, and this will be followed by a panel discussion. We would like this to be very interactive, and maybe the way we would like to propose to handle this session is that maybe we can keep your questions after the three sessions, the three presentations. So we have two options: either use the chat box, please, or you raise your hands, and in the panel discussion, as I said, you'll be given the opportunity to ask as many questions as you want, either about the presentations or any other questions you want to have. And we hope to have this during the second session of our the second part of our session today. Without further ado, let me share with you, try to share with you my presentation. Let me share the screen. Hopefully I can do it properly. Yes. Do you see my screen? Yes.
Yes, we can see. Very good.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So as I said, this will be the appetizer actually for our session today to talk to you about the water sector financing and the bank's perspective. We'll be covering a few points. Why do we need to invest in water? What are the water financing models? Then we will drive you through the ISDB financing of the water sector, and then we will conclude the session with ISDB strategic engagement in the water sector. To be honest with you, when I prepared this presentation a few days ago, and I shared it with my colleagues, and they said they made very, very interesting comment that the presentation was very much skewed towards water and sanitation, whereas the event is mainly sponsored by ICID, which is irrigation and drainage. So that's what prompted me actually to prepare to share with you these two very first slides, actually, comparing irrigation with as you can see, irrigation and water supply they share the same finite and decreasing resource, which is the water. And they are both key elements of the water energy nutrition nexus. And they are essential services, both needed for and with a focus on SDG 6. However, water supply and network irrigation, they have some differences actually, quite large number of them. Usually we use 20 water, roughly speaking, 20 water of the resource are used for water supply, whereas for irrigation it's 80% on average, of course. Water supply usually is monopolistic, whereas for irrigation, the farmers can get water from different sources, rainfall, groundwater, etc. The demand for water supply is predictable. More or less, we know that, for example, the city X would be, on average, will be using and the peak hours, etc. We know more or less the pattern of consumption patterns. Whereas for the elasticity, actually, for the irrigation is large. Actually, it depends on crops, on seasons, and climate. You know, you have a dry season, you have wet season depends, and drought years, flood years, etc. Water supply, as you know, has been elevated as a human right by the UN. So it's a basic need and has been elevated as a human right by the UN in, I think, 2011. Whereas water is not usually valued at its economic cost. I mean, it is a very important, of course, input to economic production, definitely for the network irrigation. However, and we will come to this later on the presentation, I mean, the water is not really valued at its really economic cost. Then usually for water supply, we have utilities, actually utilities with commercial costs and with the commercial structure, if you want, and the principle of cost recovery is broadly accepted. Maybe we don't have full cost recovery 100%, but it is broadly accepted. Whereas for the network irrigation, actually, usually it's the government or administrations who are managing these networks, and cost recovery is really a major challenge. I mean, really a far-fetched challenge. Then when we talk about the tariff, usually it's what we call flat fee, or either what we call increased in block tariff for water supply, whereas for the irrigation, usually it's flat per cubic meter or fee per quota, etc. And that's the challenge really with the networked irrigations. There is no link to water efficiency or agricultural productivity. That's really a challenge we have. Now, why do we need to invest in water? simply because a large number of people nowadays who still do not have access to safely managed water and sanitation services. To sanitation services, really, it's about 4 billion people actually, and 3 billion people today do not have access to hand washing facilities, and we know how important hand washing nowadays, particularly with the COVID and with all waterborne diseases. The global economic losses, actually, if we don't have adequate water supply and sanitation, the economic losses have been estimated at $260 billion annually. You can imagine it's really a huge amount. Why do we need to invest in water? There is a very large insurance company called Aon. In 2019, they said that the greatest of any natural peril came from floods, and it was estimated at $82 billion. That was in 2019. Maybe the picture will change this year because of what happened with COVID, etc. But until last year, flooding was really the major source of economic damage in the world. Today, also, we have about 800 million people around the world who don't have enough access to food. Enough food they need to live and to have an active and healthy life. And we know that water and food are intimately linked. Finally, poor sanitation, of course, water and hygiene, they are the cause actually of approximately 770,000 premature deaths annually. And when we talk about premature deaths, systematically, we know, I mean, I'm sure that I don't need to comment on this. Why do we need to invest in water? Actually, this is the graph has been taken from Gates and from the World Bank. It was a study published in 2016, and approximately we need to invest approximately $115 billion a year to guarantee access to safe access to water and sanitation infrastructure. And the needs actually have been also assessed by the OECD, I think, up to 2050, up to the year 2050, beyond the SDGs, 20 years after the SDGs, and we'll talk about this later in our panel discussion. The needs are estimated at $22.6 trillion, which is quite substantial. It's approximately, we have to spend 700 plus billion dollars a year. I mean, this is really quite a huge. However, despite all these large needs, usually investments are falling behind the needs. Why? Simply because water services are often underpriced. And I just mentioned this about irrigation system particularly. So a record for cost recovery is not very brilliant, I would say. This is one. Second reason actually is that water infrastructure is capital intensive. It requires a lot of money, and we will come to it later in the presentation. And these are long-term investments, and the payback period is really long. So this makes investors reluctant actually to invest in this type of infrastructure. And then the existing business models actually, they fail to support operation and maintenance efficiency. And again, this has an impact on the service and the quality of cost recovery and their cost recovery over the time. If we have to talk about water financing models first of all. Maybe we will put this between quotes, because there are two myths we need to dispel while talking about the water financing models. There is no universal model for financing water. This is one aspect really we have to remember. The myth number two is that in developing countries, large portion, actually 3/4 of finance for water investment is from public sources. So we can say, oh, the African Development Bank is the largest financier of the water sector in country X, or World Bank or ISDB or whatever. No, this is not true. 70%, 75%, 3/4 of financing comes from public sources through taxes and through different and public investment plans in different countries, be they member countries in Africa or Asia or any part of the world. However, the MDBs, the multilateral development banks, the international financial institutions, the IFIs, they bring like kind of a guarantee, you know, they bring kind of assurance actually when they are involved in any project financing in member countries. So usually they bring small amounts, not large amounts, okay, but their decision, their involvement really gives kind of assurance to the other range of investors. So what would be the water financing models? How are we largely used? We have sometimes what we call coherent systems for water finance with high degree of cost recovery from users. The polluter pays principle or user pays principle actually, and this is very much widespread. Is what in the French system, les agences de bassin, water basin agencies in France, and there was also the EU Water Framework Directive, which forces actually normally obliges all the EU countries to apply full cost recovery. So the users, by the way, we are mentioning here could be the farmers, they could be industrialists, or even and definitely the water utilities which are using water. So all the users have to contribute, and then this is the first model. When we talk about large surface irrigation schemes, usually governments, with the help of IFIs, they are the main financier. Okay, these are the biggest player, if you want.